Welcome everybody, including members of the public, to the latest meeting of the County Council's Audit and Governance Committee. We are on YouTube. There is a slight delay between transmission and receipt on YouTube. For members and people participating, can I remind you to remain muted unless Andy or I unmute you to allow you to speak. There are two ways of indicating you want to speak. One is to look at the bottom of your iPad, and if you just touch the figure that represents a person, you'll find the list of people comes up, and on the right-hand side at the bottom, there is a raising hand. So you raise your hand automatically. If that doesn't work, or you can't find the button, then wave your hand in front of your face, and somebody hopefully will pick it up. We can't guarantee, but somebody should be able to. Right, we start with apologies. We've got two apologies certainly, although one I think has been replaced. Go ahead, Andy. Who are the apologists?
We have apologies from the monitoring officer, Rob Ailiff, and apologies from Councillor Lewstausen and Councillor Fisher. Thank you very much.
Okay. Are there any declarations of interest? Other than the usual, where people are already obviously on other councils? No? In that case, let's move on to the minutes of the previous meeting, which was, goodness gracious, this was right back at the early part of the year when things were, quotes, normal. And a lot of water's gone under the bridge then, which is why we have such a heavy agenda and so many papers. Never mind, we proceed. I'll go through, well, I won't go through the minutes bit by bit, actually. There are several pages, but are we happy that the record of the minutes for those people who were there at the time is an accurate one?
Thank you.
Fine, that seems to be the case. I think we might have, when we approve these minutes, if you could just wave your hands, I think that might be the simplest thing. Are there any matters arising from the minutes that people are concerned about which have not appeared or been dealt with, either appeared in today's agenda or dealt with in some other way? In that case, could you just raise your hands to agree and approve the minutes?
Noted. Thank you.
Okay, thanks ever so much. I can't sign them, but we can sort that out later, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Now we move on to item 4, Grant Thornton's external audit findings from examining value for money and the annual statement of accounts. So I'm going to hand over to Peter to give us a little summary, please, of the findings. I'm going to mute myself too.
Thank you, Chair. So the two audit findings reports that we have on today's agenda set out the main conclusions arising from our audit of the County Council and the Pension Fund. Both reports are dated last Thursday, the 22nd of October. And as trailed in previous communications and discussions with officers, the deadline for audit sign-off for both the Council and the Pension Fund have been extended by MHCLG to 1920 to reflect the additional challenges for both us and yourselves in undertaking our respective responsibilities given COVID. So the revised deadline for sign-off is the end of November. And it is pleasing that with a month to go before this deadline, the work on both audits is almost complete. As referenced, Chair, in your introduction, I'm conscious you have a significant amount of paperwork to wade through here. In terms of our reports, I know they're quite long. I make no apologies for that because under auditing standards, I'm required to report across a wide range of areas to ensure you as members of the audit committee are fully cited on the issues from our work. You will, however, no doubt be pleased to hear that I'm not going to go through every report across every page, but with your permission, Chair, I will focus on the key messages. But before I pass go into the detail and go through the main findings, I just wanted to provide a bit of context to this year's audit. The 1920 audit process has been really challenging for both us and for you. This is in the main down to a combination of COVID-19 and the challenges on both sides of working remotely, and also, I suppose, us adopting what I consider to be a more rigorous and in-depth review of your numbers. And it's probably opportune at this moment just to put on record our thanks to all concerned at the council for the good cooperation and support. When I reflect back on it, I think there's been some challenging and robust conversations, but it's all been done in the common interest of getting the account signed off and done in a professional manner, and for that we are thankful. So on to the first of our two reports, the audit findings report for the County Council. Just to remind members of the committee, our responsibilities are twofold: an opinion on your financial statements and our value for money conclusion on your arrangements for securing economy, efficiency and effectiveness. If I start with the opinion, this is the biggest aspect of our role at the county. Takes about 80% of our time and ultimately looks to gain assurance that the draft accounts presented to audit are materially accurate. Throughout this presentation, Chair, I'm going to refer to the page numbers down the left-hand side. On the pack, so the first page number I'm going to refer you to is page 16 of your papers, which is headed up Audit Approach. And those are the numbers on the left-hand side that I'll refer to throughout. You will see on page 16 that we set out our materiality at £14.6 million for the county. So when I do come to sign off the accounts, it is to this level of accuracy. The key messages in respect of the financial statements is importantly that our work to date has not identified any material errors or uncertainties in the draft accounts presented to audit. You will note also on page 16 of your papers that at the time of writing this report, we were still to resolve a small number of issues, and they are detailed in the bullet points on the right-hand side. Just wanted to spend a couple of minutes going through those. So the first one is property, plant and equipment, land and buildings. We've made really good progress in this area since issuing this report last week, and should have this finalised in totality early next week. There are a couple of key contacts that are returning from annual leave next week, and with a couple of other minor procedures, we should be able to get over the line. I would say on property, plant and equipment, one of the things that makes it easier at the county is the fact that you do you do value a large percentage value-wise of your estate every year, which makes gaining insurance over the carrying value that bit easier. The next bullet on borrowing and investments, we have had some more in since the report was issued, but we do have a few still outstanding. Worst case scenario, we can adopt some alternative procedures to get assurance in this area, but third-party confirmation is always best, so we are holding out for that at the moment. The next point on pension liability testing, once again, almost there on this. When I come on to the next item on the agenda, the pension fund work is very close to completion, and that will enable me to issue a letter of assurance with my pension fund auditor hat on to myself as the county auditor on the information provided to the actuary to base the pension liability on, and that will conclude that there are no significant issues arising, which will enable us to get there on that one as well. The analytical review points on the next point has now been done and cleared, as has the final point on the annual governance statement, which I know is a separate item on this agenda. We've now completed that work, I'm pleased to say, and no issues that I need to bring to the attention of this committee. So further resources have been made available next week, and we've also built in a little bit for the following week, early the following week, to progress these outstanding issues through to completion. So subject to that satisfactory completion of that work, it is our intention to issue an unqualified opinion on the council's financial statements in the next couple of weeks. And I suppose the rest of this presentation needs to be taken in that context of that overarching conclusion. I think it does provide you, as those charged with governance, with confidence that the council does have appropriate arrangements in place for producing complete and accurately and timely financial statements, even in these unprecedented times. So I did say I'd go through a few of the key areas. Wanted to start with, I suppose, unsurprisingly, with property, plant and equipment. This is our biggest area of focus and takes up an inordinate amount of our time. It's a very large figure at the top of your balance sheet. And one of the impacts of COVID on the financial statements and that property, plant and equipment disclosure is set out on page 19 of your papers. And in particular, the fact that we are proposing an emphasis of matter, in our opinion, on the land and buildings element of property, plant and equipment. Now, within our opinion, a draft of which is in the appendix, this emphasis of matter will draw to the reader's attention an acknowledgement within your own financial statements that there is a material uncertainty over the carrying value of property, plant and equipment at year end. Importantly for you, it's not a qualification to our opinion, and it is not saying that the property, plant and equipment figure is wrong in the accounts. It's just explicitly referring to that there is an increased inherent uncertainty in those valuations. And I suppose, just to put it into context, that emphasis of matter is something that we're expecting across all our local government clients this year. It's not something Gloucestershire specific. Valuers across the country recognise the uncertainty in accurately valuing property, plant, equipment in these areas during these uncertain times, and we concur with that view. Now, as I said, property, plant, equipment, a lot of time has been spent on the audit this year, and reflects an increasing challenge for us in challenging you about some of the assumptions and judgments made. One of the things we spent quite a bit of time on this year is reviewing the carrying value of your energy from waste facility that became operational and therefore appears in your assets at the top of your balance sheet for the first time this year. And our summary of work in that area is summarised on page 21. Pleasing to be able to report that there are no significant issues arising from that work, which provides you with assurance in that area.
Peter, can I just say that I'm going to make a statement when you finish your report on this particular item 4 about the energy from waste facility, okay? And to remind other members to expect that at the end of your statement. But please carry on. And can I say, incidentally, congratulations to the Finance Directorate staff and to the external auditors for carrying out so much effective work well within the rescheduled time set by government. Well done. Very good piece of work.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so moving on then. So just as you have a big asset at the top of your balance sheet, you have a big net pension liability in the bottom of your balance sheet. And page 20, we refer to the work in this area. Given the disclosure in the pension fund accounts that we'll come on to in a minute, they contain and also contain a material valuation uncertainty in respect to the property funds that they hold due to COVID-19. And following challenge to the council has now updated the council's accounts, the revised versions that you have on today's agenda, to also include a material valuation uncertainty in respect to the council's share of the pension fund assets that form part of this net pension liability calculation. Once again, we concur with this view, and once again, that will involve an emphasis of matter in our opinion. We are due to receive the letter of assurance from the Gloucestershire Pension Fund auditor, myself, as I said, next week, and that will provide the remaining assurances we need in order to satisfy ourselves over that disclosure in your accounts. I suppose the only other area I wanted to touch on in terms of areas of importance is on pages 28 and 29 of your papers, going concern assumption. And this really just sets out in a bit more detail than we've done in previous years, given COVID and the increased financial pressures that all local government bodies are under, given COVID, our consideration of the appropriateness of the adoption of the going concern assumption. This is all about your ability to meet your liabilities for the 12-month period following signing of the account. So really, we're looking up to the short-term period to the end of November 2021. We've gained sufficient assurance through the provision of further evidence from the council that you do, and therefore we concur again with your view that it is appropriate to base the accounts on the going concern assumption, and that there are no material uncertainties to that assumption. So The accounts are very long, they're very detailed, and inevitably in such a large set of accounts, there will be a number of adjustments. I'm not going to go through all of those in detail, Chair, because they are, as I said, well below materiality. They have been made and corrected in the revised set of accounts you have in front of me. And in the main, they don't impact on the primary statement. They're mainly disclosures. And importantly, they don't impact on your outturn position. We have made a small number of recommendations within the action plan in Appendix A and have responses to management there. But they are, as I said, they need to be viewed and seen in the context of that overarching message. So that's the opinion position. Just going to spend a couple of minutes, if I may, on the value for money. So value for money for the county, based on 3 criteria set out by the National Audit Office: sustainable resource deployment, informed decision making, and partnership working. We focused by exception in areas of risk. The 2 areas we identified in the plan were future financial sustainability, and I would be surprised if that wasn't a risk across all local government bodies, but also, as with previous years, work on children's services given the Ofsted rating. Our work on financial sustainability is set out on page, I think it's 34 onwards. I'm just going to head off to that now, if I can. So the detail starts on page 34 onwards, 34 to 37 in relation to the financial sustainability. And you'll see on page 37 that we are concluding that despite the challenging climate, that we have satisfied ourselves that you do have appropriate arrangements in place for ensuring sustainable resource deployment. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes going through that in a bit more detail. I'm going to start back with page 34. So what we did do is we looked at your outturn for 1920. We did note that when the budget was set in February 19, that there was a planned use of reserves of 2.2 million to fund some of your expenditure. We did also note that given financial pressures in the demand-led services of children and adults, more money been put into the 1920 budget, I think 13 million across both service areas. And it was pleasing to see that for 1920, your outturn report did, despite all the challenges, report a very small underspend of 300k, which we transferred to general reserves at year end. So that overall message was a positive one. But we do recognise that the £300,000 underspend did mark some pretty large variations. And once again, in children's and families, 13.8 million, despite that increased funding that had been put into the budget, and that was driven by a whole raft of factors, but, external placement increases and higher agency costs were some of the main drivers. It is interesting that across the country, children's services are tending to overspend. A lot of councils have adult services, another demand-led service overspending as well. It is nice to contrast the fact that adult services did remain within budget for 1920, despite the demand pressures. But importantly, as a whole, the council was able to offset that overspend through, a combination of additional funding that you wouldn't have been aware of when you set the budget that was received in year, but also a slightly increased use of your reserves in 1920, where it went up to 4.7 million at year end. Now, I think one of the big challenges in my view for 1920 was the budget was predicated on some pretty big savings. When the budget was set, it was 19 million. And once the previous year closed and there were rollovers, it went up to about 21 and a bit million. It's quite a big ask. And we recognise that, only about 14.9 or 69% of that was achieved. The biggest area of slippage, unsurprisingly, was children and families. But we do recognise that other savings were identified elsewhere to address the shortfall. And as discussed, some of the other actions and the additional funding did enable you to come in and deliver against budget. What we do also refer to on page 34 is the dedicated schools grant. This is a big area for lots of councils, continues to be an area of concern for you and others, with quite a sizable in-year deficit, which increases the cumulative deficit at the end of 1920 to 6.7 million. I know that, across the board, across LEAs, there's lobbying of government for a solution to this. But in our view, this is a call on your general fund. It's not been treated like that in your accounts. It's fair to say that lots of councils don't treat it like that and have a slightly different view. It's not material. It's not been changed in the revised accounts, and it doesn't affect our opinion in terms of materiality. So, we reflect back on 1920. You do have a good track record of delivering budgets, but despite the continued reduction in funding, ever increasing expectations of the public, cost pressures, etc. There is regular review by members and at an officer level, and challenges to movements, and robust processes in place for that. Recognising that clearly the savings delivery wasn't quite where we would hope it to be for 1920, but we recognise, as I'll touch on in a minute, that the savings targets are less going forward. So that then takes me on to page 35. A commentary here about reserves and balances, and section 151, one officer required to consider the appropriateness of the general fund balances reserves every year. That was done as part of the budget setting round back in February. Commentary was in there about the dedicated schools grant and the deficit on there. So that was recognised. Your general fund balances at the end of March 2020, just under 19 million. And your earmark reserves of about 110 million. If we take out the school's balances, down to just over 100 million, which is a lot less than the previous years, but that's absolutely all down and intended due to the in-year use of the strategic waste reserve following the opening up of the energy from waste facility. So every council is different, but there are lots of commonality as well, and it's interesting to compare where you sit with your peers. So I appreciate it's not particularly easy to see on the chart on page 35, but you are, in the pack there, and we are reasonably comfortable with the level of general fund reserves and earmark reserves that you have, recognising clearly there will be pressures on both of those going forward, given the financial challenges. Page 36 then looks at the current year, and it was interesting to note the fact that you had reflected on where you were when you set the budget back in February in terms of demand-led services I touched on earlier. A really sizable increase in the funding going into children's and families for 2021, some really big increases, and also a reflection that the budget was predicated on a much smaller savings target, 9.6 million, then increasing to 10.5 following rollovers, and then obviously COVID hit, and that meant you had to respond quickly to the impact. And there was a clear view from the outset that it would impact on 2021 and through to 2021-22 and possibly beyond. In the early stages, as with most councils, there were some pretty sizable figures being bandied around in terms of the potential impact. Cost pressures being quoted early in the year of 11.6 million, which combined with some other overspends, you were looking at the 16 million pound overspend back in July reporting. As clarity has emerged from government, you've continued to refine your assessment. You've been submitting the monthly Delta returns to government. Clarity's been received on, the percentage of support and funding that will be available for, additional costs and to a greater extent loss of income. And that figure's now come down over the year. I think 3.4 million is being quoted as the gross amount of pressures at the moment. And I think, although it's yet to be confirmed, there are indications that you probably will get most of that. And actually, it's looking a lot more deliverable and hopefully will be less impactful on the outturn at year end. So we do take some comfort from that. Clearly, going forward, there is less certainty into 21, 22 and beyond. So then we talk about the medium-term financial strategy and the fact that there is more money going into the budgets, similar levels of savings required in the final 2 years of your medium-term financial strategy, 11 and 10 million. But we recognise that there is a huge amount of uncertainty out there. So finally, on page 37, conclusions, really generally positive, but continued close in-year monitoring and timely corrective action required to ensure budgets are delivered, particularly in those demand-led service areas, and clearly responding to the continued implications of COVID. Chair, I'm conscious I've gone at some length there. I'm probably going to stop there in relation to the county, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Peter. That's very comprehensive. But yes, there may well be some questions. How are we doing, Andy? Yeah, Brian has his hand up.
Councillor Tipper.
Thank you, Chair. What it is, being a total layman in some of the terminology, would you explain on page 34, the Council has a significant savings target for 2019-2020 of 19.1 million, and at the end of quarter two, the Council were reporting delivery of 8.7 million against this. Does that mean to say you were making a loss against that? Just to explain the terminology, please.
Thank you, Councillor Tip. I'm just trying to get the. I can see the.
If you look at the page where it says page 34,
yeah.
It says findings. The line above it, there's a line above it, and
right. Yeah, yeah, apologies for lack of clarity here. So this is, the top bit is a direct lift from our audit plan that was issued much earlier in the cycle. So at that point in time, it says significant risk from our audit plan. So that was the position when we put the plan together back at the beginning of the year, back in January. So we just verbatim copied it here as the risk at that point. Clearly, all those numbers have moved on since then.
So what I guess the bottom of my question is, what's the position? What is or what was the position?
Sorry, in respect to the answer,
either the end of the 20 year or how are we doing at the moment compared with that? So
in the middle of page 34, and I appreciate it's all quite detailed in there, you'll see that we reference the fact that really for 1920, you were looking to deliver savings of 21.4 million. You delivered 14.9 of those, 69%. But as I've previously set out, there were compensating other additional funding, use of reserves, and savings from elsewhere that offset that gap, which enabled you to come in and deliver a very small underspend for 1920.
Okay. All right. And obviously, how are we doing this year with a similar figure?
Yeah, 2021.
Yeah, so I think where I got to on 2021, we said here that, so this is on page 36. So this is where we're saying, at the beginning of 2021, early part of the reporting cycle, there were some pretty large figures being banded around in terms of forecast overspend. That has come down as clarity has emerged, because it's quite hard to monitor against your original budget for 2021, given the impact of COVID and that the initial budget was based on pre-COVID assumptions. But if you look at the overall position, and I'm sure our finance officer will be able to elaborate on this, actually the position is much improved. What are we now? We're, 7-8 months through the year, and it's a much improved position than it was earlier in the cycle. But continued close monitoring is necessary to ensure that budgets are delivered despite the challenges.
Okay. All right. I think you've done your best to answer the question. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Nigel.
Thank you, Andy. Councillor Gravell's had his hand up, I think, didn't he? And then Councillor Hay.
No, the list. Hay, Councillor Fieldley, Steve Mawson, Andrew Gravell.
Okay, who was first?
Councillor Hay.
Sorry?
Councillor Hay.
Councillor Hay, please, Colin.
Okay, thank you. There's a few general questions, which, hang on, I'm just finding the page. I made some notes. So the first one was on page 16, and it's management of override controls. And I'm just curious, you say that the last sentence is, however, this has not operated as intended since lockdown arrangements were in place. I'm just curious to know why lockdown would have made that impossible to take forward. Should I just go through the questions? Yeah. The next one was on the, and this is the override, I think. on page 23 in the IT findings, and given that there were issues with both GFRS and Children's Services, shouldn't this have been picked up by internal reviews as an issue? And I'm pretty sure that it's been mentioned before in previous audits. On the graph, in terms of the reserves, this is just a minor point, it would be helpful if there was a key, because the colours are kind of an orangey colour and blue, and I don't know the differential. And looking at the councils that have got very high reserves, they tend to be the very big councils. So in terms of reserves, this is just a total figure rather than the percentage of reserves. I think that would be quite a helpful thing to understand and see how we are in terms of, what level of reserves we have compared to the overall budget.
Stop you there. If you have other questions, can we come back to them and let Peter respond to those first ones, please?
Thank you, Councillor Hay. I'm just going to make sure I get the page numbers here. So I think that the first one about management override is page 18 of the papers. So I'm just going to go back to that. The issue here is in terms, and once the officers will be able to elaborate, I think, in terms of journal authorisation, that was done as a manual exercise retrospectively for a sample of journals and held in hard copy files in the office. Clearly, the ability to do that with large numbers of officers working from home is compromised, and we're just bringing it to the attention via this report. Clearly, a lot of the work that we've been doing and the substantive testing has resulted in us looking at and selecting high-risk journals and assessing them for appropriateness, and that didn't identify any concerns in terms of the appropriateness and the effects of those journals. So that's page 18. Page 23, I think it was, in terms of the IT controls. We bring in our IT colleagues to review arrangements, and we use the outcome of that to inform our approach. Our approach is a substantive one, so these are about controls. So even though they are raised here and included in the action plan with a response, we have adopted a substantive approach to testing the figures of the accounts, which, despite this, provide us with assurance over the accuracy of disclosures in the account. And in terms of the comparison of your balances and reserves, absolutely, Councillor Hayes, there is a legend missing. And just to clarify, the blues are the general fund balances, and the oranges are the earmarked reserves excluding withdrawals. I take your point about the relative size of the councils. There's a number of different ways of cutting this, we could do lots of different ways of doing this. Interestingly, next year, I believe that you'll be getting probably more of that differing analysis, given the new National Audit Code and value for money conclusion that will require us as your auditors to go into even more detail in terms of your financial statements.
Thank you, Peter. Colin, does that satisfy you for the moment? Could we turn over to perhaps to Councillor Gravels, who had his hand up?
Yeah, if I can come back later.
Thanks. Councillor Gravels, could you...
Yeah, hi, good morning. Yeah, hello, good morning, everybody. So there seems to be a bit of a connection, on this side of Gloucester. So if I keep disappearing or fading, please bear with me. I've just been involved with a peer review of the cabinet portfolio that I have on Gloucester City Council, and it was the first virtual peer review that the team had undertaken. And at the end of it, they said that they found that the cooperation of all the staff at the city, it was pretty similar to the other peer reviews they've done outside of COVID and the pandemic. So my question is a general one to to the auditor, and is what areas of work do you think that you've missed out on, which potentially need addressing because of COVID? In other words, once we're out of the pandemic, where will you guys dive in first?
So thank you, Councillor Gravel. So I suppose, our role as auditors is strictly limited. It is an opinion on the financial statements and the value from any conclusion. As outlined in my presentation, I am comfortable that it's taken a lot longer, due to the challenges of undertaking an audit remotely. It's been resource intense on both sides. But there's nothing that we haven't done and obtained the assurances that we would in any normal year to enable us to discharge our responsibilities. So there will not be anything that I will be going into in any more detail as things revert back to normal. I think it's important to distinguish between external audit and internal audit.
Okay.
And internal have a much wider remit.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Councillor. We've had...
Chair, can we go to Councillor Theodolou, please, and then to Steve Mawson, because they both have their hands up as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Councillor Theodolou.
Thank you, Chairman. The first is a simple question, and I've got two other points to make. But in the assessment of the value of the properties owned by the council, by the authority, have you revalued or taken valuations of the county farm estate, the rural estate? And if so, how have you valued it? That's the question. I think it's a simple one. The other question I've got is about materiality. And to be quite honest, I never quite understand what we're talking about when we're talking about materiality. For example, if we were to say, well, the children's are £14 million adrift, but they're only £10 million adrift, so that wouldn't fall within the materiality, so we'll just forget about it. I'm sure that's not what you're saying, but it seems as though when we talk about materiality, what are the consequences of that? And the second thing is, I'm quite sure we discuss elsewhere this issue of home working, which Andrew Gravels has probably already referred to. But it does seem to me to be a very material risk when I believe that we have more than 2/3 of our staff working remotely from home. And it's a question of, first of all, productivity, but also what are the threats which that may bring to us in a different way, disclosures and so on. So I don't know how you're going to deal with that issue of the risk of home working, because it seems to me to be a bit of a monster. But I presume you have considered that in your deliberations. Thank you, Chairman.
I think that's been a key feature of their approach to try and get over that particular challenge of home working. But over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Councillor Theodolou. So just pick up the 3 points. The farm estates, clearly, just to be clear here, it's not us valuing them. It's the responsibility of the council to value all your assets at least every 5 years, and more frequently if there is a risk of material movement, and that's what you do. And actually, at the council, you have a programme where actually quite a large percentage by value of your assets are reviewed more frequently than every 5 years, which gives us further assurance over the material accuracy of the carrying value. Off the top of my head, I don't know when the farm estates were valued last, but we would have checked that as part of our overall audit procedures. You would have valued them using your valuer to and their expertise to come up with a value. We have appointed our own valuation experts to challenge the basis of those. And as I said, we are comfortable, as set out in our audit findings report, with the disclosures and the carrying amounts in the accounts. In terms of materiality, I just want to be very clear here on materiality. It's 14.6 million. What that means is that when I sign the accounts, hopefully in the next week or two, we are saying that the primary statements, the balance sheet, the comprehensive income and expenditure account, all those are individual lines within that are material to within 14.6 million. It doesn't mean that if there's an error below that it's just forgotten about. In the main, as a council, when errors or adjustments are identified, they are made to the revised set of accounts, as is the case this year, even if they don't need to be made. We can't insist on you making changes to the accounts if they're below materiality, because it doesn't, in our view, affect the reader of the accounts. But you have a tendency to correct them anyway. And if you didn't correct them in this year, the expectation would be that you would correct them in the following year when you produce the following year's accounts. And also the importance of misappropriation of funds, fraud, all those sorts of things. If there was any large amounts of those would clearly be articulated and require a proper response from the council if those were identified. So that's I just wanted to be clear on that point as well. And in terms of homeworking, I'm not sure I'm best placed to answer that in my role as the external auditor. I've articulated previously how, that has been a challenge for us in terms of evidence. So clearly, if in a normal year we would sit with officers in the council and go through a lot of the entries and evidence, we would be past it. We would sit, look at share screens, would sit behind them and watch them access information via their financial system to get assurances on first disclosures. We're doing that all remotely. We're sharing screens. We're seeing them download information and sending it through to us. There's a lot more questions we're asking of them to gain assurance over the authenticity of the evidence to support the accounting entries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I think our Director of Corporate Resources, Steve Lawson, might be able to add text to that last issue. Go ahead, please, Steve.
Thank you, Chair. And I got a few issues I just wanted to pick up on. So I'm just going to pick up on budget setting and monitoring and those issues. A bit around COVID, a bit around reserves, and then a little bit around homeworking. So I'll pick up the homeworking one first because that's the most current question. So Peter's right in terms of the accounts-based issue. That is about proof of records. I think we have demonstrated in this audit that there are a few examples, very minor examples, where we still rely a little bit too much on some paper, and that's, I think, where it's caught some of us out, particularly the journal entry stuff. So I think we need to revisit that. And actually, records should exist, whether there is a paper record or a digital record, and we need to make sure that in all our work that is the case. I have to say I've been very impressed with the working relationship with auditors and officers on making sure that evidence is provided to auditors very quickly and very promptly on all fronts that they are asking questions. And let's not kid ourselves, that's sometimes very challenging, even when you can see face-to-face. So actually having a very prompt response, getting back to auditors on their questions, on their issues, on their requests for evidence is absolutely crucial to making sure a smooth audit takes place. And that's the part that, to be fair, can be more challenging when you're not in front of people and when you're working at home. And I think teams and auditors have done a great job battling through that. But that's primarily why the government sought to give us more time to do some of that work. On a general point, I think teams are more productive on the whole when they're working at home. It is undoubted to say there are issues where team working and other kind of team events are better face-to-face, but we also need to take into account the balance of what staff are finding, and staff are telling us generally they find it a lot more flexible working at home. Generally, they are able to get through greater workloads. That's not all the case in every job, depending on what you do. And we need to think about that as we move out of COVID, whenever that may be, March, April next year or whatever. We will need to think about those balances. But I do not see a scenario where we're going to move wholeheartedly back to office-based services 100% of the time. We've made some massive leaps forward in terms of productivity, and I would not want to lose all that advancement. I said I'd just talk a little bit about the budget setting and budget monitoring. And I think it's worth remembering in terms of the auditor's assessment on value for money on children's services. I've been involved in children's services where it's been inadequate before. And even if you get a really slick budget setting, budget monitoring, no overspend, you still get an adverse value for money assessment because it is currently rated as inadequate. And you would only change that when you've got a different rating that's better than inadequate. So I don't think the value for money assessment would change. The commentary that Pete's given and the colleagues have given around the overspend is a concern. We know that is a concern, and we did put a lot more money into the 2021 budget setting. And myself and Paul meet with Chris Spencer's management team on a very regular basis to monitor that position. And we have got an element of stability, I think, over the last 6 months. We've not seen the post-COVID spike. So we were expecting a big spike in demand when children went back to school in September. That's not actually happened yet, and we need to keep on top of that. It's a financial concern. It is a financial concern, but I do think we are starting to work through all those issues. And I have to say, having been through it previously, it probably takes you about 2 or 3 years to recover from that spike. They reckon somewhere when you're in intervention, you're spending somewhere between 15 and 20 million extra on your services, and you need to get a grip of that first before you can actually bring that cost down. Now, as Pete rightly says, that is a spend position that's reflected across the country as well. But I actually think that Gloucestershire's doing a fantastic job on children's services. I'd like the spend to come down, but wouldn't we all? You know, in terms of the COVID position, I think Pete's right. I think the government have listened to what we were saying, not just in county councils, but across the country, in terms of the allocation of resources and the issues. And there was a heavy focus on adult social care and the spend that needed to go in adult social care. But generally, every issue that's been picked up, every issue that's been raised, the income shortfalls, I know district councils have raised issues around leisure, you know, all the issues that are being raised locally have been picked up. And I think the county council has taken a very prudent approach to COVID. We've dealt with issues as and when they've been necessary. We've spent the money as and when been necessary, but we've not gone crazy with some of the cash. And some of our colleagues around the country are now worried and are resetting emergency budgets as a result of that. The county council is not in that position. We have a robust position for year end. Yes, we're overspending on the non-COVID spend, but actually the COVID stuff, I think, it is more or less in check. And we got some extra cash that came through in the tranche 4 of money that came through last week. Just a couple of bits on the reserves. And we are going to start to move away from this obsession with what is the percentage of the reserve picture from the general fund, because it is not reflective of what the real position is. Actually, the better position is a proper risk assessment against what are your issues that you're going to face. So just as Pete was saying there, you know, if you've got 20 million of savings to deliver and your deliverability of savings, that's one risk assessment that could impact on the need to use reserves. If you've only got 10 million of savings in your budget, then clearly that risk is reduced. But you would still, you know, and potentially be carrying the same amount of general reserves because you got the same percentage. So I do think we will move away from that, and we started to put more information in that in the budget setting for last year, and we'll do more of that in analysis going forward, so that we can work out, and as colleagues really are understanding, and I will finish it shortly, that volatility and stability of the budget is the key thing, not just a standard percentage. So what's the assessment of where we are on those volatile service areas, and where do we need to target additional resource? So you will start to see in next year's budget setting a proper risk assessment of our issues as we move forward through the budget setting, and how much do we think that might align, and how does that compare to the level of our earmarked general reserves? And that's a much more robust position rather than just one standard percentage, which is quite linear in a way and quite one-sided and doesn't necessarily reflect all the different positions that we've had. And hopefully that means that when we get to the audit position next year, colleagues will be able to see that as we move through the revised standards that we'll be after represent. And just to finish, I just wanted to echo Pete's thanks really to all the hard effort that colleagues have gone through this unique and difficult circumstance that we've been working through. And I've been privileged to actually witness most of that activity taking place. And none of those issues that have come up have been beyond the wit of colleagues in both audit teams and finance teams to work through. So I would just like to pass, on behalf of the management team, my thanks to everybody that's worked on these over the past weeks and months. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, very much. Very illuminating about home working, and also about the partial abandonment, at least, of that ratio of reserves to general fund. Yeah, we see what you mean. We do have Colin still, who's got a hand up. Colin, do you wish to proceed? If you do, I'm going to allow you one more question only, and it mustn't be a double header.
Okay. I do think I listened to what Steve had to say about the financial position of children's services, but actually on the value for money report by Peter, the bold paragraph at the bottom is, I think, a real concern that actually it does say, we have concluded that the council did not manage this risk effectively and did not make appropriate use of performance and service quality information, etc. I think that's a real issue for us. And as an audit committee, I mean, if such an issue were raised by internal audit, we would have the officers come to audit and tell us what they're doing about it. And this has been such a difficult and such an ongoing problem. I do think that we really ought to have Chris Spence and the cabinet member come in here and say why it is that actually the external auditor is saying that they haven't managed that risk appropriately. And I really think that we as an audit committee need to understand that more fully. And in fact, I think this should be highlighted to the report to council when that comes. I did have another issue about the energy for waste, which you're going to...
I'm going to stop you there, Colin. I did say one question only. I think your recommendation that we should call accountable people in is absolutely right, and it's probably something we can pick up with Teresa in internal audit. I certainly do think we should have people coming in. What is being described there, of course, is the situation in the past. What we really need to know is what is the situation now, ongoing into the future with children's services. Okay, I'm now going to, before we move on to the next item...
Sorry, Nigel, can I just jump in? Councillor Parsons has been waiting to ask a question as well, please.
Councillor Parsons.
Thank you very much, Nigel. I'll be fairly quick. It's really about, I've got to get the page up. It's to do with the pension liability, which I always think is wrong. Page 25. My understanding really is that there's always a problem with this pension liability because it's a deferred liability. And we try and estimate what it is today. And obviously, but you don't say it's a deferred liability. Because it's going to be paid out over quite a considerable period of time. And the other point, which I don't think is brought out, and I hope I've got this right, is that currently, or the most recent figures I saw, was that in fact our contribution rate to the deficit which we had is that we're now over 100% on that, or just about 100%. Though, of course, there's been a lot of fluctuation in the stock markets. I wondered if, Peter, you could just expand whether my understanding is correct and why you don't create more as a deferred liability as distinct from a current liability.
So Councillor Parsons, you're absolutely right. The figures, I think, is it's £700 million of net liabilities. Clearly, that is not going to be payable out in one lump sum in the near future, and it is spread out over a very long period of time as pension benefits become payable. And the actuary, it's when the actuary, and there's been a recent triennial revaluation, when they do that, they then look at future contributions, employer and employee contributions to ensure that any deficit on the fund is recovered into the medium term. And I think from recollection off the top of my head, I think for Gloucestershire Pension Fund, it's 15 years. So the aspiration is that, the contributions, which would be percentage of employer-employee salaries combined with the lump sum payments for deficit funding, would be sufficient to bring back the fund into balance. But obviously, it only takes small percentage change in assumptions, whether it's longevity, other demographics, to make that liability go out even higher or reduce. And obviously, it's heavily dependent on the general assumptions around return on investments, etc., which have clearly been enormously volatile. So it's a notoriously difficult thing to do, and that's why we do tend to see some large fluctuations year on year on the net net pension liability disclosed in the bottom half of the balance sheet. Just Chair, if I may, I'm just conscious that when I paused during my presentation and opened it to questions, I did have a little bit more to say to finish off the report. So I know that Steve touched on children's services, and I know that reference has been made to the energy from waste. So with your permission, at some stage, I'd like to just sort of conclude that for another couple of minutes, if I may, on this report.
Yes, go ahead, Peter.
So am I able to just to finish by saying, so why don't you show it more as a deferred liability than as a current liability? That's my point.
I think
David has his hand up, and he may be able to explain why. David, would you like to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Yes, in the balance sheet, it is shown as a long-term liability at the very foot of the balance sheet, recognising that the liability will be paid over a number of years, and indeed for some of the younger members of staff, that the liability won't actually be payable for sort of 40 or 50 years. So it's very much reflected as a long-term liability within the County Council's balance sheet.
Thank you. Back to Peter. Steve, you did have your hand up, or have you just simply not put it down? Okay, well, we'll go to Peter now, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I'm conscious that I went through the opinion and the VFM conclusion for future financial sustainability. I'm conscious that a number of references have been made to children's services. So they are that the work on children's services in terms of VFM work is summarised on page 38 and 39, and we do know that we are in a very similar position to last year in terms of you have had a couple of visits from Ofsted September last year and February this year, I think, which did highlight concerns about how long it's taken to address some of the critical weaknesses that were identified in the original inspection back in July 2017. And as Steve points out, I mean, and as Councillor Hay pointed out, the inadequate rating still exists over children's services, and as a result, the default position for us from a value for money point of view would be that would result in us concluding that you do not have arrangements in this area. But clearly, what I also wanted to say is, yes, we've looked at financial sustainability, yes, we've looked at children's services, but for some of the more longer standing members of this committee, you will know that there is an outstanding objection in respect to the energy from waste scheme that has prevented us from concluding our VFM work and issuing our certificate actually for the last 3 years. And this does continue to be the case for the current year, not least given the objector's recent appeal against the High Court judgment in relation to this scheme. And on that basis, we decided, given the appeal, that it would be appropriate, to put the objection on hold, because the outcome of that legal action could impact on the determination of our objection. But that said, while our work still again is currently on hold, we are exploring and we're discussing this with our own legal advisors whether there is any way in which we could proceed with this work in the near future to enable us to conclude in this matter. So we are looking at potential alternatives that do not prejudice, any of the separate action that's going on elsewhere. So I just wanted to make sure that was articulated as well, given that the questions are flowing.
This is the point at which I can state that it is our intention in Audit and Governance at the next meeting in January to hear, if possible, from your specialist consultant, your independent consultant, so that we can then have an open discussion about the challenge to the energy from waste facility. It has been a matter of huge frustration to this particular committee. We are a scrutiny committee after all, not to be able to discuss and talk about these issues. But of course, if there's an ongoing appeal against the preliminary judgments, which there is at the moment, that might further delay our discussions on the subject. I suppose the real reasons are that comments made by members or by the committee would inevitably, I think, get into the press and the papers, and that could be construed as having an unnecessary and unhelpful influence on the findings of the High Court. So that's where we are, but our intention is to have, with your support, is to have a proper and open discussion at the next meeting. I'm sure others would join me in this, but it could be blown sideways by further action at court. Now, we've had a question about pensions. Thank you for that, Sean. We're now going on to Grant Thornton's external audit findings for the pension fund. So, who's going to do that? I guess you are again, Peter, aren't you?
Yes, me again, Chair. Thank you. So, as you say, this will follow a very similar format to the previous report, but will be slightly shorter because obviously our responsibilities in relation to the pension fund only extend to the opinion. So, taking a similar format, if we move to page 59 of your papers, which is headed up the audit approach, you will see that once again, we've set a materiality level here, an increased amount for the pension fund, given the large level of investments, 22.4 million. And when we do sign off the accounts, it will be to that level of accuracy. Once again, key messages for you as members of the Audit and Governance Committee is that the work to date has not identified any material errors or uncertainties in the draft accounts presented to the audit. There were a small number of procedures outstanding when we issued this report last Thursday, also set out on page 59. Derivatives. Derivatives is a particular area of judgment and inherent risk within your investments. This has now been through our valuations team to provide their independent assessment of value. I'm really pleased to see that that's concluded that no issues are arising from that. So that work is now complete. As with the county, there is a material uncertainty disclosed within your accounts, your pension fund accounts in relation to property funds. We concur with this again. We are still working with officers to clarify the extent of that material uncertainty. One of your funds has indicated there is material uncertainty that we concur with. Another of your funds that has property funds has indicated that part of their property portfolio has material uncertainty, and we are just challenging them as to why it doesn't extend to the full portfolio of property funds. So we're almost there on that. Moving down the bullet points, letter of rep and annual report. Letter of representation is on the next item on the agenda. For the pension fund, you need to issue an annual report. The deadline for that is later than the accounts. It's in December, and therefore that's not been fully produced yet. But when it is, we will need to check that for consistency with the statements. So that will happen after we sign off the opinion on the pension fund. And both for the pension fund and the county, we have received updated versions of the accounts recently from your officers. I think we got one through yesterday, confirming all the agreed adjustments been put through. And obviously, the anticipation is that if there is anything else that comes out in the intervening period, they will be considered as appropriate as well. So I mentioned that the council was well progressed. The pension fund is even more progressed, and we're confident we're going to get there sometime next week. In terms of our work, the work is focused on those areas set out in the plan. The biggest focus is the investments. All investments are categorised as level 1, 2 and 3, the level 3 being the hardest to value and subject to the highest degree of estimation uncertainty. So that, as I said earlier, the derivatives have been involved, thus engaging with our own auditors, valuation experts to look at these. And I suppose the only thing really to bring to your attention is, as I said on page 65, the material valuation uncertainty that we are continuing to discuss with officers of the fund and the fund managers themselves. It's a generally positive message, but once again, I'm probably not going to say anything else on the pension fund at this stage, but I'm happy to take any questions on that particular document.
Thank you, Peter. Do we have any questions?
Nobody's raised a hand. Oh, Sean has just raised his hand.
Sean, please.
I find it quite interesting that you're drawing particular attention to the property values. My understanding is all the investments are risky, and we're seeing, for example, I'm not quite certain what potential we have in them this year, a tremendous fall in the value of any oil investments, such as Shell, which historically used to be considered really quite solid investments. So I know we've had the problems of the Woodford Unit Trust, whatever it was called, on property. But I just find it a quite extraordinary situation that you're particularly concentrating on property, whereas in fact the vast majority of the equity investments are all at risk.
Peter? Peter, do you have a comment? Or David?
I'll take that one, Chair. I'm not sure if Peter's frozen or not. I've seen him move
Yes,
for a little while.
I think he must be, yes. He's in a static Zen-like contemplation mode.
Yeah, I'll take that one. I mean, this isn't in terms of risk associated with the investment. This is purely in terms of the valuation at the year end. So where you've got a level 1 or level 2 investment where the investment itself is quoted on some form of exchange, then the valuation at the year end is very clearly known. This applies to our level 3 investments where there is inherently a degree of uncertainty associated with those particular investments. And in property in particular, given that the impact of COVID really kicked in almost immediately before the year end, valuers across the world are saying that as at the 31st of March, there's an element of uncertainty with regards to that, and appreciating that there's always a degree of uncertainty with regards to property valuations, but it's just more pronounced at the 31st of March 2020 than it has done before. So it's just there's an extra disclosure to readers of the accounts pointing that extra uncertainty this year, and in our audit report, which won't be qualified, we are just drawing attention to that matter that's being disclosed in the financial statements.
So it's a good storm in a teacup.
Sounds like it, yes. I don't see anybody else with their hands up. So if that's the case, we've noted the 2 reports from Grant Thornton, for which thank you very much. You may wish to say for the rest of the meeting or even for part of it, but if you did excuse yourselves at this point, I would forgive you. We're now going on to the annual statement of accounts, item 6, which is in terms of the pages of substantial part of our meeting. Of course, there is a detailed narrative that accompanies those reports and a very long list of bits of accounts as well. But I'm going to turn to Paul. It's his opportunity to summarise the statement of accounts. Paul.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'd like to start off just by thanking External Audit and our internal finance teams for the work they've done so far in getting the statement of accounts to this stage. It's been a very challenging year, but we're very fortunate that we have a very good and robust relationship with our external auditors, which have allowed us to get to this stage. So having said that, I'm pleased to present the annual statement of accounts for approval by this committee. They've been prepared, as ever, in accordance with SIPFA's Accounting Code of Practice and International Financial Reporting Standards. Since we published the initial reports, a short amendments report has been sent out, and I think that was sent out yesterday. So there's 2 changes on that. First of all, to the statement of accounts for the County Council, there's a series of financial there's a financial table there, but those items are kind of quite small. They're about timing issues, and they have no impact on the financial statements. They're just ensuring disclosures match the financial statements. So it's more a timing issue. So that's just a correction. And then the second one was on the pension fund, where there was an incorrect reference to people being directors of Ubico and Brunel. So hopefully that's kind of self-explanatory, but the rest of the accounts are as originally sent out. So in summary, the Executive Director of Corporate Resources, as the Section 151 and the Chief Finance Officer, has approved the statement of accounts as presenting a true and a fair view of the financial position of the Council as at the 31st of March 2020 and of all income and expenditure that took place in that financial year. Just to remind members that the statement of accounts does include the Gloucestershire Pension Fund accounts, and they've been so the full report is included in Annex A. And as the Chair said, it's a very long document, but but there has been a training session that most councillors attended, and we obviously have had the explanation of the audit process, and we've got confidence that external audit have done a robust review of those. We had to issue the draft statement of accounts by the 31st of July. This was a little bit later than previous years. Previous years it's been the 31st of May, but because of COVID and the challenges that faced, the government changed the regulations. So we had to issue the draft accounts on the 31st of July on our website, and there was a 30-day period of public inspection. I'm pleased to say that no objections were received during that 30-day period of public inspections. And I think, as Pete, the external auditor, mentioned previously, the regulations state that the finalised audited accounts have to be approved by the 30th of November. So pleased to say we got to this stage and we're nearly there already, a month ahead of schedule. Obviously, earlier on the agenda, the external auditors have gone through their commentary and their recommendations, which there were a variety of questions. But in summary, it's really pleasing to note that there were no material errors or adjustments that were needed, and the external auditors are minded at the moment to give an unqualified opinion of the accounts. So I think that's a great achievement. Due to the outstanding objection relating to the energy from waste, they're obviously unable to conclude their value for money work, and the chair has made a statement earlier about that. So therefore, in summary, the committee are asked to approve the statement of accounts, and then we need to get the Executive Director of Corporate Resources and the chair to sign the letters of representation that are in Annex B and C. Obviously, signing will be a little bit more challenging because we're not all in the same room, but I'm sure our colleagues from Democratic Services will find a way around that particular issue. As the external auditors have said, they haven't quite concluded their work. There are a few minor issues that they need to conclude, but we're confident that we can sign these letters of representation, and if their finalisation of their work does result in any changes, we can do that by remotely by informing the committee via email. But we're confident that we've got to a position where the chair and the Executive Director of Corporate Resources can sign the letters of representation and the statement of responsibilities. So I guess that's the overall conclusion. So we open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Paul, very much indeed. I'm pleased to hear that no member of the public objected to the statement of accounts during that 30-day period, but that's not to say that members of this committee wouldn't object. I'd like to keep it open to questions, particularly for those people who were not able to attend the training day. So let's see if there are any questions. At the moment, there don't seem to be.
Ray Theodolou's waving.
Okay, you must get used to using these buttons, Ray. But yes, go ahead, please.
Perhaps you'd like to come and Quennington, Chairman, and show me what.
No. Right, I don't think it's Quennington. Lovely as it is.
I believe that my name was taken in vain, and Paul, has it now been removed? I had a message from you this morning which I couldn't quite understand, but I'm said to be a director of Ubico and Brunel, and I never have been a director of either, but I have been the corporate shareholder vehicle for both of those from time to time, but I don't think I'm the corporate vehicle for Ubico anymore. I can't trying to find where that's mentioned. I can't see it in the figures, but Paul, I think you said that amendment had been made, but your message gave me reason to believe that it might have been not totally made.
Okay. If I respond to that, Chair. So in the amendments that were sent round, we amended the statement that referred to Councillor Theodolou as director, and that's on the second page, the pension fund accounts. But having reviewed it, it still says that you sit on the board, which I think is incorrect, isn't it?
That is not. That's an incorrect statement. Yes, I do not sit on the board.
Yeah.
Either company.
So I would propose that we're going to change the amendment that was sent round. It still needs a little bit of tinkering with, but I will remove the reference to the board and just refer to Councillor Theodolou as corporate shareholder for the Brunel pension partnership, and then the Councillor Stowe as the corporate shareholder representative on Ubico.
That sounds right.
Yeah, so I'll talk to Andrew about getting those wordings. It's really just removing reference to sitting on the board and referring to you and Councillor Stowe as corporate shareholder representatives for the County Council.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ray, for raising that, and thanks, Paul, for answering. In that case, I'm going to ask people to vote by raising your hands, because I don't see any other questions at the moment. Thank you for the work, as we've already said, that's been done by External Audit, and obviously to the finance and corporate finance team. Splendid. If you'd like to raise your hands to approve this statement of accounts, then please do so, and hopefully we can get unanimity. Looks like it from everybody who's actually here anyway. So those accounts are now approved, and we'll find a way through scanning or whatever of signing them well within the deadline. Well done, everybody. We now move to the item annual governance statement. We've already heard something about that from the external auditor, and we had a fairly thorough, I would say a very thorough, elucidation from Teresa in our training session. So again, if there's anybody who missed that training session, has questions to raise about the annual governance statement, then I think after Teresa's hopefully brief introduction, we can tackle those issues. Please go ahead, Teresa.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. As you're all aware, we had the detailed training session on the 9th of October, so I wasn't sort of going to go into the detailed framework, the assurance framework, etc., because we did cover that quite nicely out. I can confirm, though, that this annual governance statement summarises our council's corporate governance arrangements that we have in place during 1920, and the majority of the year was unaffected by the coronavirus, although, as you're aware, the pandemic has been recognised within the statement. I can also confirm that the Council's AGS and associated assurance framework has been developed in accordance with SITFO and SOLIS, the publication Delivering Good Governance in Local Government 2016, so it reflects the national guidance. So this year's annual review identified 5 key corporate governance matters, and the details of those 5 can be found from page 271 within your pack. So like Pete Barber, I'm referring to the page numbers on the left-hand side of your pack. So the 5 key areas were future financial sustainability and COVID-19 impact, the Ofsted Inspection of Service, Children's Services, Gloucestershire Fire and Rescue Service, recruitment and retention of employees in hard-to-fill critical positions, and COVID-19 impact on governance. As you're aware, we keep these matters under review, and a further update is proposed to be presented to you at your January 2021 meeting on actions taken to address those issues. And taking into consideration the comments been made earlier, I was sort of considering proposing maybe what I normally do with the improvement plan updates to the January committee is present the actual updates myself. I get the updates from the relevant executive directors, chief executives, etc. But particularly in respect to, say, something like the Ofsted review, would it be something that the committee would welcome maybe the actual relevant senior manager attend the January 21 committee to provide an update on some of these key governance actions like the Ofsted outcomes? Just a consideration for you. As I said, I'm not going to.
Would members like to see that? I see 1 or 2 people like John nodding, Colin nodding. Yeah, I think we would. And yes, please, that would be very, very helpful.
Okay. I wasn't going to say anything further at this point, but more than happy to take any questions on the AGS. The AGS, you are required, members, to actually approve the AGS as well.
Councillor Payne has a question, please.
Yes, Councillor Payne.
And thank you, Teresa, for another exceptionally good and easy to read report. I'm pleased that there will be a report to the January meeting on the progress on these issues, but I'm particularly concerned about the Ofsted and the comments that are made on page, I think it's 274. Just trying to find that. Yes, there are a couple of issues. We still seem to have a major problem in one of the core elements of children's services, and that is the retention of social workers. So that is something that is really of concern. And the fact that in the report it mentions that the employment opportunities and conditions in Gloucestershire are not as favourable as other counties, and it will be interesting to know what actions have been taken to make it a more attractive package. And the other issue is this Grow Your Own programme. I think it's a good idea, but I'm interested to know of the people who are part of this programme, who are receiving training from Gloucester County Council. Is there a commitment from those people to actually undertake work with Gloucester County Council, or can they then just move on, having been trained, and leave us in the same position as we are now? So those are things that clearly may well be addressed in January, but they are of concern to me. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I'll take those questions away and I'll discuss them with the Director of Children's Services, so to be brief for the January committee.
Yeah, that seems an appropriate course of action. Are people happy to support and approve the annual... We've got Colin, I think. Yes,
please.
Noted. Thank you, Colin. Please.
It's just a question on the colours, really, sort of amber and green. Is that the key shows clear colours, green, amber and red. And then in the charts, there's a kind of salmon colour and two green colours. And I may have missed it, but is that explained somewhere? And is it that, is that the salmon colour, is that kind of amber going on red? Or is that like...
Sorry, Colin. Yeah, I mean, it is the amber, but I was trying to differentiate between amber in 1819 and amber in 1920, just to show a bit of a difference there. But I appreciate that, and that can be rectified for next year.
Thank you. It's good to know that Colin is our resident colour consultant. There must be people here actually who are colourblind, in which case I think it's worth noting who it is in advance so that we can make some provision for them to understand some of these bar charts. Are we happy then to support? Because I see Sean now, who's raised. Thank you. Sean, go ahead.
I'm just rather concerned that on page 262, it really says that the Audit and Governance Committee is to promote high standards of member conduct, but it doesn't. Our responsibilities doesn't seem to extend to officers, which I found quite extraordinary. I would have thought that our responsibilities to extend high standards of conduct throughout the council. All right, it is delegated down to officers to ensure it. That's always the way in any large organisation. But I'm very surprised that it's restricted to members, and it's restricted further on to members. That's my first point. And the other point is the signatures for this exclude the monitoring officer, who I would have thought has a very important role in ensuring high standards.
Good questions, thank you. Teresa, is that an omission not to include officers, or is it dealt with in another part?
I mean, the terms of reference for the Audit Committee is based on SIPLA's best guidance, and the Audit Committee's overarching role is standards of conduct for members. I mean, officers' sort of standards of conduct do actually come via the audit committee if there are any issues, particularly around sort of fraud and irregularity and things like that. I mean, there may be others within the Paul or Steve may be able to answer that a little bit better than myself. Sorry, what was the other question, Sean?
Well, so my other question was, I'm just going back to that. It very clearly states that it extends to members only. And I find that very disturbing, particularly on your letter comments. My other thing was, it seems to me that the overall paper is signed by Peter Bungard, the leader, and also Steve. It seems to me that the monitoring officer has a particularly important role over this, and he should be signing it as well.
The guidance actually stipulates that it is just the chief executive and the leader of the council. That's the guidance that actually says we do include section 151 officer as well for financial governance, but that is something that the council can take away for future if it's thought appropriate for the monitoring officer to sign it as well. That wouldn't be a problem for the future, but the actual guidance does require the leader and the chief executive.
It's not the first time that I've disagreed with SIPFA.
Chair.
Sorry, I do suspect the guidance requires the minimal approach of those two signatures, but there's probably no harm in adding other signatures if it was felt to be useful. Steve, you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you look at the second bullet point on page 262, the officer behaviour is covered by the employee code of conduct. The employee code of conduct is not an item for audit and governance committee. I mean, Rob is a consultee of the work, and we do go in. I think the danger is if we start adding more signatures, we could keep going and keep going and keep going. You know, and we do involve the management team closely. Teresa brings this report to corporate leadership team as well. So that effectively what the guidance is trying to say is that when the chief executive signs it, he's signing it on behalf of all the officer cadre. You know, that I can guarantee you that Rob has been heavily consulted on this document, as have I. And I don't normally, in other places, I've not been used to signing this document, but again, I'm happy to do so for the Gloucestershire perspective. I'm not sure there's anything gained by adding another signature from Rob, but we're happy to consult on the different process if you want for next year.
Thank you for the question, Sean. Are there any other questions, Andy? No? No, she shakes her head.
No.
Okay. Then it's the annual governance statement for 1920. Could you please raise your hands if you support and approve this? Thank you, Brian. Ray?
Thank you.
Ray, you're invisible. And you've still got your microphone on. Thank you. But can we see you, please? Well done. Excellent. Thank you. I think
Alan, could you?
Yeah, Chairman, it's Alan. I'm invisible as well, but I totally support.
Thank you very much. Any others? No. Thanks very much. Well, then that is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Treasury management, Paul. At the last meeting, we approved all the strategies. So how are things going, please?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chair. Yes, this committee receives 3 reports on Treasury management each year. This is the mid-year review of Treasury management activity during the year. In addition to this, at other times in the year, you receive a report, an end-of-year report, and as the Chair said, in February, you receive a report which actually outlines our strategy for the year. So as I said, this is the mid-year review of Treasury management activity. I'll just do a quick summary. In terms of borrowing and external borrowing, no long-term borrowing has actually taken place during this period. So there's been no new borrowing, and also no long-term borrowing has matured during this time. So it's been quite quiet on the external borrowing front. In terms of investment returns, obviously, as we've heard before, this period has been dominated by COVID and also a low interest rate environment. Since the beginning of the financial year, the base rate has been 0.1%. So obviously it's been a very challenging environment to try and get any kind of returns from investments. But despite this, we've maintained an income return of 1.5% during this period. So it's been a challenging time, not much activity on the borrowing front, but we have maintained the income returns. and also just to give members reassurance that during this period, all the Treasury management activity has complied with SIPFA's Code of Practice and also the Council's Treasury management strategy. That's all I've got, so just open it up for questions.
All other questions? Colin.
Just a question I've raised before about, in a sense, in our statements, whether we are able to give a view on ESG in relation to our investments. I'm not going to raise the issue of being for, against, or whatever, but there is certainly more interest and certainly questions being asked. Clearly, the investments in the pension fund are that much bigger and so there's bigger impact. And in previous years, it is maybe a bit of a challenge, but I think as we go forward, more and more questions are being asked of councils, and it is still quite a lot of money that's invested. And I think some statement in terms of ESG needs to be there or highlight what the strategy is.
Just quickly, Chair, on that, just to say, obviously, we do comply with the council amendment that went through to say that we wouldn't have any new investments in kind of fossil fuels, but we don't specifically state that in the report.
I think that would be helpful to highlight it because of public interest, really.
Yeah.
Is that possible?
We can note that for future reports, unless the committee have a strong feeling that they want this particular report amended. We can do that for future reports.
Thank you, Colin. Good question. Anybody else, please?
Councillor Tipper, Chair.
Right.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd just like to present the other argument. There are probably just as many people who would be demanding value for money and perhaps got different views on what we should be invested in and not investing in. My personal interest right now is the mechanical capture of carbon dioxide. So I could be demanding for us to be invested in that kind of recovery. So what I'm trying to say is that one man's meat is another man's poison, and so all I'm trying to say is that yes, I think the spokesman is being very diplomatic, and it's being noted, and that's all we can demand. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you're supporting Colin Hay here, actually. Because a lot of those newer investments in green technologies are actually proving to be reasonably profitable, which wasn't always the case. Are there any other questions? Thank you for the report, Paul. We're going to move on now to Teresa. As I think most of us appreciate, this is Teresa's last Audit and Governance meeting. And as usual, we're making her work extremely hard, which, given that you were intending to retire earlier than this, and you've kindly agreed to continue because of the COVID crisis and various other issues, I think it's really commendable that you're still with us. Teresa, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, got it? Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure working with the committee. The purpose of this report is to provide the current progress of internal audit activity against our 2021 plan. There's a lot of detail within this particular report, so due to the size of it, and hopefully a lot of the detail is self-explanatory to you, I'd just like to bring to your attention some of the key points. So firstly, if I could take you to page that we did meet all 64 work and that no formal recommendations were made. You can find the full EQA report if you wish to read it within the link in the report on page 318. So the other two key areas I'd just like to bring to your attention is the limited assurance reviews. And these can be found from page 324 of your pack. So these reviews relate to the disposal of assets of vehicles, and that's excluding GFRS. This is the corporate disposal of assets procedures. And two children's services audit reviews around unregulated placements and packages of support for fostering. Again, these have provided limited assurance opinions on the control environment. So I wasn't going to go into the detail of those reviews, but again, may I recommend that the committee considers requesting the management to attend the next meeting of the committee to provide an update on the actions taken to address the recommendations made within those three audit reviews. I'm more than happy to take any questions.
I'd certainly like to recommend that they come and attend to explain what's happening in response to the audits. Questions, please. No.
You've raised at this stage. Members, does anybody have a question at this stage? No.
Thank you. Inevitably, because of COVID, the internal audit plan has had to be revised. So we're going to ask Teresa to briefly summarise the main changes. There is a very detailed chart of the internal audit plan, which of course you probably have looked at, which does, I think, highlight those changes, but it will be useful to have Teresa just to summarise what they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as you quite rightly said, due to the pandemic and potential revised risk profiles, we decided to revise our internal audit plan just to make sure that we continue to focus on the key risks of the organisation and provide the relevant assurance needs. So we did quite an extensive consultation with the executive directors and directors, and as a result, we're providing the revisions within Appendix 1, which fits from page 368 of your pack. But in brief, I mean, there hasn't been a lot of change, which is very positive to report. We are able to continue with the original plan, which is I'm very pleased to say. We're proposing to defer 8 activities, 3 of them being high priority and 5 being medium priority activities. And the rationale for those deferrals can be found on page 366. But they are either to do with, due to COVID-19, things like the ERIC system hasn't been able to move forward as it could have been, and also things like the Orbital St John's arrangements haven't been able to progress as well as it could have done during COVID-19. So in addition to offset the deferrals, what we have been doing as a result of COVID is we have been sort of supporting the business, not as auditors as such, but actually supported with things like supplier relief. We've worked with the IT Integrated Transport Unit with their supplier relief payments, helping them design out risk when they're applying payments. We've been doing some volunteering work. We've worked with Strategic Finance to review and provide assurance regards premium care providers. And we've also been doing some COVID-19 relevant irregularities, things like reviewing shielding claims and things like that. Whilst we've sort of changed the plan as it stands, I still want to highlight that the plan's dynamic and it's flexible. You know, it's not a set in stone, so we will respond to any emerging risks with all the changes being reported to Audit and Governance Committee. So I'm more than happy to take any comments on that.
Colin has his hand raised.
Yes. Yes, go ahead, Colin.
Chair, I just wanted to ask Teresa, clearly this committee looks at the risk register and how well it works. And it's probably too early, and I understand that. There would have been a risk, because exercises take place, about what to do in a pandemic and the response and everything else. And I think it would be, we'll go through a whole series of looking at what we could do better and this, that, and another. I specifically want to ask whether there are lessons to be learned in terms of what goes into the risk register and what the mitigations are, particularly and exercises and so on and so forth, what information we had. Because I think that could inform other things which are very high risk but low likelihood. Well, we can take a view whether pandemics are or not. But I think it, in a sense, it goes back to some of the flooding that we had, where there were really unforeseen circumstances. And it's how we respond in those circumstances and what does need to go in the risk register, or whether actually you can't do it anyway and we've just got to get on with it, which, I don't think is terribly helpful. But I think it would be a really informative bit of work to see how well the risk register worked in terms of preparedness.
Yeah,
So
thank you, Colin.
You're not asking for us to have an oversight of the risk register as such, because that's very much, I think, corporate overview and scrutiny's job, along with the corporate team, but to run a sort of filter over past risk registers to see how accurate and effective they were at identifying the risks. Is that what you're saying?
It is, because that might inform us well in terms of what goes into a risk register in the future, and hence how well we might be able to respond to things that we, in a sense, come out the blue.
It sounds a bit like not being able to predict the winner of the 3:30 at Ascot. Anyway, Teresa, for you to reply, perhaps pass over to Steve or somebody.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Colin. Just to give you some assurance that we do have 2 strategic risks on the risk register regarding business continuity, emergency response arrangements, and they are monitored on a quarterly basis and reported to the relevant scrutiny committee and to Cabinet. As you say, though, the pandemic is unprecedented, and probably the longevity of the pandemic is something that we probably need to obviously reflect for future. Just to also provide you with some assurance, we are running a strategic risk register workshop on the 3rd of November with CLT. So that is something that we can I can talk to Steve about afterwards, and it can be something that can be raised at that particular session to take that forward.
Are there any other questions, Andy?
No, nobody else has indicated or raised their hands at this stage. Sorry, can I just check? Simon, are you there, please? Is the YouTube footage still running? I know everyone's having a few issues with IT, and I just wanted to check.
It is, Andy, yeah. I've just checked. Yeah, it's all running. I'm keeping an eye on it while I'm doing other things, yeah. Okay.
That's just gone off the screen. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sorry, back to you, Chair.
Good, thank you. Yes, in that case, as we do, I know, have not only Dave Norman, Cabinet member for that area, but also from the Fire Service, Gavin Roberts, available. So let's move on to the GFRS action plan, please, Teresa.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As the committee are aware, we undertook around 18 audits within GFRS over the last 2 years, with a number of them providing a limited assurance opinion on the control environment. So this report is to provide the committee with an update on the progress made with those implementation of those recommendations, and to give you the independent assurance to the committee that they are or have been or are being addressed. The suite of appendices attached to the report provides the full details of the current position, and there's also some comments made by the Improvement Board members and the lead officers involved in the process regarding the board's achievements and their experiences to date. And so therefore I wasn't intending to go through each of these pages in detail, as hopefully they're self-explanatory to you. However, what I would like to acknowledge is that even during this extremely challenging period, GFRS, by the Improvement Board, and with discussions with the lead cabinet member and the chief fire officer, have made real positive progress and applied a real strong drive to complete the implementation of our recommendations, and they're looking to achieve these by the end of the financial year. I'd really also like to acknowledge that this has not been an easy task when considering GFRS's other COVID-19 commitments, but this really is evidence to me that they continue to focus and demonstrate that strong commitment to driving good governance within GFRS. So we will be providing a further progress report to you and intended to be in March 2021. However, if there are further updates that we can provide, we will provide that earlier to you in January 21. But as I said, I would really like to acknowledge that, that the drive has still been there, and I've been very, very pleased to say that, you know, by working with the Chief Fire Officer, you know, he continues to want to get this, the audit recommendations implemented to make sure that they can move forward as a service. So more than happy to take questions, but I do know that colleagues here are, senior colleagues are here from the fire service, so if you would like to ask them any particular questions, then they're here to answer them.
Yes, welcome Gavin, welcome Dave. It's been a long wait for you. Let's see if the members have any questions they want to put to you over and above Teresa's statement. Sorry, did Will indicate? No, you didn't. I thought you waved your hand. Perhaps it was clearing the screen with something. Okay.
Councillor Parsons has a question.
Councillor Parsons.
Yes, thank you very much. I think at the very head of the report, it says, I'm just going to get it up actually, important, Gloucester County Council's internal audit function conforms to the international standards for internal auditing. But one of the major things which was, I think, with the fire and rescue was that it was going its own way. Now, all sorts of things have been said to be done, but I haven't found a comment in the report that, in fact, the cultural change, which I think is important, is that the fire and rescue services now seem to be adopting the standards which we've got in the county council much more than they had before. I'm certain it's there, but I don't think it's the statement's been made anywhere. I just want to have confirmation that people are happy that everywhere that it is coming into line with what we would expect as from the county council.
Yeah, we might ask Dave here. You're there. What efforts at integration have been made during this period, Dave?
There have been significant efforts, Chair, to work through the processes that were identified, not clearly through audit, but also from HMI CFRS, because I think what we've got to remember here is that we had the issues that arose in 2018 and the comments that were made about the previous chief fire officer. Then the appointment of the new chief that clearly identified in his early days and the development of his senior team that a lot of the comments that have been made unfortunately had a lot of weight behind them. And then along came HMI CFRS, which was a difficult report to read, like trying to read trying to mark your own homework in some respects was a real challenge for people within the service. Culture, you cannot change culture overnight. To begin a cultural journey for the fire and rescue service, in my view, is something that will take 2, maybe 3 years to actually fully embed. The fire and rescue service under the chief has got closer and continues to get even closer to the county council, as it should be, because what we have to remember is the county council is the fire authority for Gloucestershire, and therefore I am more than ever convinced that working even closer with the teams and the departments within Shire Hall and move away from the vision that Water Wells was an island on its own will not happen moving forward under my stewardship and under the direction of our current chief officer and principal team. We will work long and hard to embed a new culture into a service and get a stronger form of governance as part of the county council.
Thank you, Dave. Gavin, do you want to add anything to what Dave Norman has said? We can't hear you. At least I can't hear you, Gavin. Is that commonly the case? Simon, can you help here?
Gavin, sorry, have you got any headphones you can plug in? Because we can't hear you and you don't appear to have a functional screen. Yes, Steve, sorry.
Chair, while we're waiting for Gavin, I mean, I'm also involved heavily with Wayne and would share the comments that Dave has been making, Dave Norman's been making. And in particular for across the corporate teams, I've seen a lot of involvement trying to understand and not necessarily corporatize, but make sure is relevant to the fire service, all the workings that we have, all the central policies that we have right across the county council, so that we can understand, and colleagues in the fire service can understand how does this apply to the fire service. So that's not changing anything. That's just understanding the different circumstances that we have, you know, expenses returns, HR processes and policies and all that kind of stuff. So I feel where appropriate, they're questioning them and saying, what does that mean for over here? Have we got that information to hand to be able to do it? And I think that's the right process to do it. And in some cases, it's helping us bring some of the policies together. So, for example, bringing HR and finance policies together in one place so that they can be seen by the relevant managers for both the council and the fire service.
Thank you, Steve. I can comment from my own experience on the Cabinet panel that one of the indicators of cultural change is the staff survey. And I think what happened before under the previous regime is that they weren't taken seriously, and they now are being taken seriously. And the points and comments that staff are making during their confidential staff surveys are being picked up and run with. Isn't that true, Dave?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it is. And it's also interesting that when I looked at the last set of returns from GFRS staff, not only what was written, but the number of them who bothered to complete them. It was a significant increase, a mind-blowing increase from the number of staff who this time actually committed their thoughts into writing and also put some very, very positive suggestions forward to the Principal Officer Group of the Fire and Rescue Service. It's very pleasing, not just when your staff are actually on a journey with you, but when those staff actually bring forward suggestions that the Principal Officer team and me in my role as Cabinet member can support and see that it actually comes to fruition. And what you have to say, and I have regular update meetings with personnel, whole-time personnel and on-call personnel, and they're all saying that they can clearly see a change and they feel that they are now being valued, which unfortunately, under the previous regime, many firefighters were not valued by the previous Principal Officer team.
Sorry, Chair, can we try and go back to Gavin now? Hopefully he's resolved his issues. Gavin, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Yes, we can.
Unfortunately, you can't see me. The video isn't working. I'll have to change computers. So in answer to the question before, Chair, that was raised about the integration of fire and some points around culture, and I did catch Steve's point before I just switched off computers and moved over. I think the culture is a long journey. We've made some massive strides, and we're doing work at the moment with that around our positive action, around our new recruits for the foreseeable future, some of our equality, diversity and integrity work. So there's a lot of work going on in-house at the moment to make sure that lessons identified have been fully learned and we apply to become a very progressive and inclusive service going forward. And when I say inclusive, I don't just mean saying inclusive to our staff within GFRS, but across the Community Safety Directorate and within the County Council. And with that in mind, I think within the report, there are still some outstanding actions that we're working through. And I think that indicates the work that we're doing really closely with colleagues across GCC So we're working very closely with the HR team, the Business Service Centre, Strategic Finance, the ITU team, to make sure that when these policies, procedures and systems are in place, they are fully integrated, not just within fire, but they can add value across the whole of the County Council.
Thank you very much, Gavin. I'm glad you had the chance to speak eventually. We do sometimes have technical problems, but I'm glad we've got over that one. Are there any other questions to Teresa, Gavin, or to Andrew? Sean has got his hand up. Sean.
Yes, I just want to thank very much for those comments. It's very comforting to hear that. What I would like to say, can we bring them out a little bit more in some of these written reports? Because I think that's the really critical issue about what went wrong. And as I said, it wasn't really quite in this report. We sort of went round it. So if that could be done in the future, I think it would be a great help. And I think in the minutes, it's important to know that the journey is well on its way. Thank you, everybody, very much.
Thank you, Sean. I guess the Improvement Board has its own reports, doesn't it?
Yeah. Can I just come in on that one, Chair?
Yeah.
The reason it hasn't been mentioned in this particular report, as Gavin alludes to, this report is giving you a progress on our sign off to the recommendations, and because some of the more integrated processes are still in progress, we haven't finalised that yet, so that's why it hasn't actually come on this progress report. What you'll find with future progress reports is that when those systems and processes, policies, procedures, etc. have been fully implemented, we'll be able to report on that. Does that help?
I hope the silence is an acknowledgement that does help. Is there anybody else who'd like to ask questions on the subject of the GFRS? As if not, can we thank Andy and Gavin very much for coming along? Thank you so much. That's much appreciated. Thank you for your patience, and we're glad to see what's improving and to encourage you in that improvement journey. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Chair.
Teresa, your contribution is finished. What can we say from the rest of the committee? Would anybody like to contribute? I've got a personal question to ask you, but if anybody would like to express our thanks to Teresa, please go ahead and do so. The floor is yours. Sean, first of all, thank you.
Well, Teresa, I've got to know you for really quite a long period of time now, and I'd like to thank you very much for your objectivity, the tremendous work which you've done for the council. I'm not going to say how many years, because I don't know how many years it is anyhow. And I hope that you have a very long and happy life. So thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Sean. I've worked with you for a very long time, and it's been a pleasure working with you. Thank you.
And Teresa, Ray, please go ahead.
Thank you. Teresa, I can't understand why you're going. I mean, why? What are you going to do all day? I mean, for heaven's sake. So, anyway, I mean, I hesitate to encourage you on this step that you're making, but I hope you've considered all aspects of it. I'm sure that you will miss us greatly and wish to come back, but perhaps you won't. Who knows? But I would like to thank you personally, because you did help me when I was in as cabinet member for finance, and we had our meetings, which I well remember, and they were always very helpful. And despite this misjudgment in leaving us, I do wish you well and for the future. And of course, if any of us can be any help to you in your future, please don't hesitate to let us know. And thank you very much once more, Teresa.
Thank you very much, Ray. I much appreciate your comments. That's lovely. And it's been a pleasure working with you too over the many years.
Teresa, can you just tell us when you joined the authority?
Oh, gosh.
In 1978.
Gosh. That really is impressive.
And I was in audit then, 16 years old.
16, my goodness. That's fantastic. Will, did you have something to say?
Thank you. I'd just like to echo those thoughts, Teresa, and also you should be very proud on a report like this that is normal, and the fact that the auditors thank us or you for providing the information succinctly and very well. So it's a shame you're going.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Will. Thank you.
sorry, Chair, as well. For the record, we've just had a message from Gavin Roberts. He'd just like to say a big thank you to Teresa and the team from everyone at Community Safety Directorate to say your support as a critical friend has been invaluable. You've helped them to meet their audit recommendations and become a more effective and efficient service. And for that, they thank you.
Splendid. John has his hand up, and then Steve. John.
Thank you. Teresa, by comparison with many of my fellow colleagues, I'm a relatively newcomer to audit and governance. And in that role, I have always found your report to be very clear, covering a phenomenal range of subjects with a degree of expertise, which I find quite extraordinary. So thank you very much for the work you've done, and in particular for making me be able to understand the issues that were before us. And I hope you have a long and happy retirement.
Thank you very much, John. That's much appreciated.
Thanks. Steve?
Yeah, thank you. I would just like to echo comments. I mean, Teresa was absolutely instrumental in my induction into the authority and worked really, really closely with us on several key pieces of work. And obviously behind the scenes, Teresa is one of the key elements of the statutory officer group as well, and regularly comes to the statutory officer group with lots of detailed information for myself, Rob, and the chief exec to hear and get a grip of, and is very clear in all the stuff. And I've worked with a number of auditors over the year, and we are losing somebody that's absolutely brilliant. Really, really great loss to the authority, and will be challenging to replace. We are on that recruitment process at the moment, and fingers crossed we'll be able to make some announcements fairly soon. But I'd just like to thank you from all the management team, Teresa, for all the work that you've done for us over the years.
Thank you so much. You're priceless, quite clearly. Colin.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I want to echo everything that people have said, and thank you so much. And I think the one thing people haven't mentioned is simply that smile. And no matter how challenging, it breaks out. So that I will really miss that. But it's an indication, I think, that the respect and everything that you've got for us. But you are so cheerful in some of the things you have to do. And it doesn't detract from how incisive you are in your work. So you will be missed.
Very much, Colin. Thank you.
Indeed, hugely missed. Right, we're going to...
Councillor Skipper, sorry.
Brian, yes, okay. You must have the opportunity to say something, Brian, because you've known it for a long time.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, everything's been said, but the word that I've picked up on is the word brilliant. Brilliant in everything you do, the way you presented yourself, and always good to be work with. Even when it got really serious, we were able to get through, and everything was explained in everyday terms. Really appreciate it. 11 years with you, and brilliant. Thank you. Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you.
And so say all of us.
Committee as well. You've absolutely been brilliant. You've always supported me with everything that I've needed to have done. You've always been behind me. So I really would like to extend my thanks to all of you as well. But thank you.
Very good. Gillian, it's your turn now. Item 12 on the agenda, we mustn't forget. We still have work to do.
Yeah, don't know how to follow that other than by follow on with your final 3 reports, which are around the annual report around RIPA investigations. And then the second one that I'll be talking, or rather my colleague Bonnie Stiles will be talking around, is around the update regarding local government ombudsman complaints. And finally, back to me for the final one, for the annual review of member code of conduct. Rob Ailiff, as you know, sent us apologies, so he asked me and my colleagues to come along this morning. So the first of the final 3 are, as I say, it's the annual report for your committee in respect of the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. We've got Karen Smith here, who's the Head of Regulatory Services and Consumer Protection, who has been heavily involved in also preparing the report that you've got before you. And both Karen's team and my team work very close together in terms of ensuring compliance with the Council's statutory obligations in this area. So members might recall that last year was the first year we started to bring these reports to you, and that was following the annual inspection that was taken by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office in 2019. And this was all about making sure that members of the committee had the overall oversight at member level in terms of the statutory RIPA powers. So very briefly, you can see, members, the report actually focuses on two preliminary areas: the annual review of the use of the powers, and you can see within the report we carry out an annual review. What I would mention within the report at paragraph 5, it talks about an internal audit, and if I could just clarify, obviously that does have a special technical meaning, and I think I just want to clarify that actually it's an annual review rather than internal audit, just for the benefit of my colleagues. Obviously, Therese, I can see you there in terms of smiling, so I just wanted to clarify that point. And secondly, just bringing together around the actions that were identified at the last annual review. You'll see that we have set out in the annex a set of 3 phases in terms of actions that we feel we should be taking around surveillance type of activities. What we're talking about here is what we call non-RIPA surveillance activities that officers may be carrying out in their day-to-day activities. So there is an overall timetable there. And what Karen Smith and I have discussed, in actual fact, is that we think we need to review that timetable in view of our priorities that we now have regarding COVID-19. So what I would propose, Chair, if you agree and members agree, is that when we come back next year, we give you the full update on the progress on that. But equally, if members feel they want an interim report on how those are going, then certainly we can do that. I don't think I've got anything else to add. I don't know whether members might like a very short update from Karen around the overall statutory framework that we operate within, if that would be helpful for members. Other than that, more than happy to take questions.
Thank you, Gillian. Yes, it would be nice to hear from Karen. I think we still have time in a way. Is Karen there?
I am. I'm just trying to unmute.
We can hear you.
Oh, excellent. In that case, sorry. Yes, I am. Good morning, Cabinet. Yeah, certainly, as some of you may recall from last year, this is perhaps a little bit out of the ordinary for some of the stuff that the County Council does. But in order for the Council to perform some of its functions and statutory duties, Council officers may from time to time be required to carry out what might be quite intrusive surveillance. Under normal circumstances, as I'm sure you're aware, the Human Rights Act will provide certain protections for individuals, including what's known as a qualified right to a private and family life. And that's called a qualified right because under certain circumstances, that right may be overridden if it's felt to be necessary and proportionate to do so, which is where RIPA comes into the work that the Council does. My team in particular are sometimes engaged in covert surveillance to identify who might actually be carrying out some of the consumer protection breaches that we investigate. And with those, we employ RIPA because it doesn't actually give us any additional surveillance powers. But what it provides is, as Gillian said, that kind of protective framework where we can use our existing powers under the legislation we enforce. But the Council is protected from allegations of breach of an individual's human rights. I hope that explains kind of what RIPA does. It doesn't bring anything in itself. It is that kind of protective framework that the Council can employ. And then within that, again, just to assure you that we do have a robust internal authorisation process. No local authority can engage in surveillance activities without, in addition to our internal process, appearing before a magistrate's court and obtaining judicial approval for the activities we wish to undertake. And yeah, that's it really. I think Gillian would carry out as head of legal that review that I mistakenly have called an audit of our processes. And we are also externally audited on a roughly a 3-yearly basis by an inspector from the Office of the Investigatory Powers Commissioner. So if there are any other questions on how we employ RIPA, I'm obviously more than happy to take them.
Thank you, Karen. Colin had his hand up. Colin?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a question. The report talks about our officers, but when we employ outside people, and I'm thinking of fraud investigations in particular, they're not specifically our officers, but would we use, do they still come under our RIPA kind of regulations, and do we do the application for them? And I think maybe that needs to be just highlighted, that it's not just our own officers, but anybody working on our behalf for such an investigation.
Yeah, if I may. Certainly, Colin, there is, underpinning this, there is quite a detailed procedural guidance which is circulated via StaffNet and is available to the officers. That clearly specifies that any third party that's brought in by the council is bound by the terms of, bound by the constraints under which we operate RIPA. And yes, any application for the use of covert surveillance that's governed by RIPA would have to be an authorisation that was obtained by an officer of the county council.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Gillian, I think we have a shared fraud team with other councils, don't we, as well as using externals. Is that right?
Probably Teresa will be able to update on that. I know she's obviously involved probably more closely than I am on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've got an internal audit counter fraud team that's sat within audit risk assurance. So they deal with the majority of any fraud irregularities. But we do also have a contract with the Gloucestershire County Fraud Unit. So as and when we require capacity or different skill base, we are able to pull on the support from the Counter Fraud Unit. But we do have robust arrangements and agreements in place with them to do that. But as Karen says, they would be commissioned on our behalf and working via ARA, and therefore it would be complying with the County Council's RIPA policy.
Sorry, Nigel. Councillor Field has a question as well.
Thank you. Ray?
Chairman, I was looking at page 460. No, it's not. Sorry, yes, put 460, paragraph 4.6. Directed surveillance operations. Are you with me?
We are. Yes, I can see it.
The items there include surveillance concerning illegal tobacco sales, breach of disqualification, livestock, illegal tobacco sales. Are we at all concerned about illegal drugs, or is that outside our remit?
I think that's a matter for the police. So
it's outside our remit.
Yeah, it doesn't fall within our functions as a county council.
Right, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Thank you, Karen. We now move on.
Welcome.
Yes, can we move on to Bonnie, please, on item 13, the annual review letter from the Local Government Ombudsman.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair, members. My name is Bonnie Stiles. I am a principal lawyer and business partner with Legal Services. I am also the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman Link Officer for Gloucestershire County Council. So I will be presenting the Local Government Ombudsman Annual Review Report. The report itself, together with the Ombudsman Annual Review Letter, can be found at pages 467 to 473 of your papers. I presume the members have had the opportunity to review the report, so unless anybody would like me to do so, I don't tend to go through it verbatim. Instead, if I could refer you please, to the table at page 469 of your papers. This table provides the statistical breakdown of how the complaints which have been received by the Ombudsman for the period 1st of April 2019 to 31st of March 2020 have been concluded. You will see, if you look at the very bottom, in the last column of the table, the total number of complaints that the Ombudsman received, and that being 83 in total. Of these 83, 4 were not pursued at all by the local government ombudsman because the complaints were incomplete or invalid. The remainder of them progressed to the assessment stage of the local government ombudsman process, whereby the Ombudsman requests information from us, from Gloucester County Council, for its initial core paperwork, and also they require confirmation that the complainants have completed our internal complaints procedure first. Then 20 were not proceeded with because they were deemed premature complaints, as it transpired they had not exhausted our own internal complaints procedure. And then 36 were closed at that stage by the Ombudsman, as they had decided on the initial papers there were no case to proceed with. The remaining 23 were then passed for full investigation. Of the 23, 12 were upheld and 11 were not upheld. So out of the 83 that they had, 12 were upheld in that year. And as with previous years, the majority of the complaints considered at full investigation stage by the Ombudsman fell into the social care field of either children's or adults. But given these are the local authority's largest areas, these findings were not unexpected. All 12 that were upheld were, however, completely resolved, and where the Ombudsman had suggested recommendations, they were resolved in line with the Ombudsman recommendations. And just by way of a reminder to all, the types of recommendations which the Ombudsman generally put forward are for an apology to go to the complainant, some form of compensation, which ordinarily ranges as a couple of £100, although the largest in this last year was for £1,500. And then another recommendation, which is commonly used, is a review of the Gloucester County Council policies. At Gloucester County Council, we do take all complaints seriously, and we understand that the importance of learning from them, as well as using them to identify if there are any broader organisational risks or governance issues. We do this by ensuring that the complaints and the details of which they're raised, not only with the service areas, but at scrutiny committees as well. And also the cases are reviewed on a regular basis by the Chief Executive, the Monitoring Officer and the Chief Finance Officer. The complaints upheld during this period are, of course, all serious, but have not raised or identified any wider specific areas of concern as a result. Chair, I believe that summarises the report, but I'll be happy to take any questions.
I think you're muted, Andrea.
Sorry, Sean, you're right. Councillor Robbins, are you there? We've got Councillor Parsons and Councillor Hay, who both like to ask a question.
I don't know if we have any figures for previous years. I was just interested as to the number upheld, not any of the other figures. What the sort of the pattern was in say the previous 2 years, if you've got them available.
I do, thank you. The last year there were 11 cases upheld, and if you could bear with me just a moment.
If not, we could circulate that information later. Want to do so?
If you could, yes, yeah, please, thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Councillor Hay?
It's just a question, really, on the report, and I think it's the last page. It's 473 on the sort of printed page, and it's the last item, which is satisfactory remedies provided by the authority, and it's got 0%. And I just want an example or know what that means, because it's 0, and I see that the average is 9%. My understanding would be that this is the authorities sorted it before it goes to the Ombudsman. None of ours were, and I don't know whether that's good, bad, indifferent, about right, or whatever. And it seems to me that, you know, presumably, the more that can be resolved before it gets to an Ombudsman, the better.
That was my question too, Bonnie. Does it mean we're not reporting on those cases, or do we just not offer a remedy?
Thank you, Chair and Councillor Hay. No, with those complaints, they've gone through our complaints procedure, which obviously they have to do beforehand. A resolution has been made, and yet the complainants then continue to the Ombudsman. So with ours, obviously I can't give you an example because we haven't had any, but had we offered one where we'd provided a remedy and then they continued to the Ombudsman would have seen we'd offered a suitable resolution, and that's when it would be recorded. We are, with the comparable table, we are compared to every other county council across the country, so we are one of 30, and obviously I'm presuming they're just different demographics, maybe different expectations in different areas. I don't know, but certainly the ones that we are resolving at our local authority level are not getting reported then again to the Ombudsman, or at least they certainly haven't in this last year.
There's a high level of satisfaction when we've given a resolution. So it could be positive, Colin.
It could, thank you.
Are there any other questions, please?
Always look on the bright side.
Yes. Are there any other questions, please, of Bonnie while she's here?
Just looking at the report for last year, it was 11 upheld, 10 not upheld, 17 closed after inquiry, and 29 incomplete or open, and 67 in total. So there's a rise, but we've still not only seen one further upheld.
Okay. Thank you, Steve, very much. Right, in that case, Gillian, thank you, Bonnie, very much. Can we move on to the final item?
Yes, certainly, Chair.
Conduct. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so obviously this is the report which the monitoring officer prepared. It's an annual report that is regularly before your committee. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. Obviously, it refers to the fact that in the last year there were no reasons to conduct an investigation or convene a hearings panel regarding complaints against members. And it also just flags with the committee that in May 2021, we will be going through the recruitment process for our 2 independent persons as their term of office comes to an end there. But what you will see in this report this year is that the monitoring officer has given an update regarding the recommendations from the Committee on Standards in Public Life. Members will remember that the Standards in Public Life Committee produced a review of local government ethical standards in January 2019, and that included a number of recommendations. And you can see within the appendix, Rob Ailiff has put an assessment of firstly the recommendations, the current position, and identifies next steps that this authority should be taking in relation to those recommendations. Obviously, you can see from those that they include a range of decision-making processes, consideration by this committee, consideration by the Constitution Committee, and ultimately by the County Council. Just one final area that I'd like to flag is that the report highlights the work of the Local Government Association, who have been undertaking a review of the standards in public life recommendations, and they've developed a model code of conduct, and there is an actual link in your report to be able to have a look at that. Obviously, going forward, the council will need to consider whether they wish to adopt that particular code of conduct. And again, that'll go through our decision-making processes in terms of consideration by Constitution Committee and ultimately the County Council. Chair, I think that's all I wanted to say. Again, happy to take questions from members in terms of the report that's before you, but at this stage, it's a merely noting report of the areas that I've highlighted.
Colin's hand was up. Was that because you didn't take it down from the last item or what? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions of Gillian, please? Yes, we look forward to having a look at that model code of conduct. And it's good to report that there haven't been any allegations. Fingers crossed, but then, a long time to go before the end of this particular electoral cycle. Well, if that's the case, then can I thank everybody for their persistence and patience? Thank the officers in particular for providing full and reasonable answers. And lastly, of course, on behalf of the committee, we wish Teresa a very happy retirement. I'm sorry, in a way, that you're retiring this year, because I've heard from people who retired this year that it's extremely frustrating for them. They can't go on round the world tours as they used to do. Is that part of your plan?
Yes, it is. We've booked a flight. We're very fortunate. We've got a home in Portugal. So from the 27th of December, we've booked a flight out and we haven't booked one back yet. So fingers crossed. But thank you all very much.
You may not.
It's been a pleasure working with you all. Thank you.
Thanks. Well done, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you.
Bye
bye.